It was supposed to be a routine jog, something to clear my head after a long day of work, a way to escape the chaos of life, even if only for a brief moment. I've always been the type to run, especially at night, when the world around me slows down and the streets empty out. There's something peaceful about it, an odd kind of solitude that makes everything feel just a bit more manageable. I had always jogged alone, and I'd always been fine with it, or so I thought. It was a quiet Wednesday evening, and the streets were as empty as they usually were at this hour. I laced up my running shoes and left the apartment, the cool night air instantly hitting my face as I stepped outside. The neighborhood I lived in wasn't anything special, just your typical suburban area, with rows of houses lined along the street and a few parks scattered throughout. It wasn't the most exciting place, but it was safe, or so I believed. I started my jog at the usual pace, my breathing steady, the rhythmic sound of my footsteps mixing with the occasional chirp of crickets. I wasn't trying to push myself. I just wanted to relax, get lost in the motion. It had been a long day, and I wanted to zone out for a bit. As I jogged past the quiet homes, I noticed something odd, a shadow moving out of the corner of my eye. I dismissed it at first, figuring it was just the wind or a car passing by in the distance. But then as I ran further down the street, I saw it again, a shadow just on the edge of the sidewalk, flickering in and out of sight. My heart skipped a beat, and I slowed my pace, glancing over my shoulder. Nothing. I shook my head. I had never been one to jump to conclusions, so I chalked it up to the usual tricks my mind played on me during late-night jogs. The quiet street, the darkness. It had a way of distorting reality. But the unease lingered in my chest. I tried to focus on my breathing, the steady rhythm of my legs hitting the pavement. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. It wasn't until I rounded a corner that I saw him, a man standing in the shadows of an alleyway. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie, his hands buried deep in his pockets. At first I thought nothing of it. Maybe he was waiting for a friend or just taking a break. But something about him felt off. He wasn't moving, just standing there watching me as I jogged past. I glanced at him briefly, my gaze meeting his, and for a split second, I felt a chill run through me. His eyes were hidden in the darkness of his hoodie, but I could feel them on me, staring, following my every move. I quickened my pace, suddenly desperate to get away. My heart rate increased, my breath becoming shallow as I pushed myself to run faster. The alleyway behind me grew more distant, but the feeling didn't leave. I could still sense him lurking just beyond my vision. I turned another corner, my feet pounding against the pavement. But the sensation of being watched only intensified. Was he following me? I couldn't tell. I dared not look back again, afraid of what I might see. Then I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. Footsteps echoing in the distance. They were light at first, then louder, faster, closer. I stopped in my tracks, my breath caught in my throat as I turned toward the source of the sound. My eyes searched the street, but there was nothing but the empty stretch of road stretching out in front of me. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, frozen in place, my mind racing. What was happening? Was someone following me? Was I just being paranoid? I didn't know, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The streets were still empty, the only sound the distant hum of traffic from the highway. But I wasn't alone anymore, and that's when I saw him again. The same man, standing at the end of the street, his form partially obscured by a street lamp. He wasn't moving this time, just standing still, his eyes locked onto mine. I couldn't make out his face, but I knew he was staring at me. I could feel it. My pulse quickened, and I started to back away, my instincts screaming at me to run. But my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, caught in some kind of trance as I stared at him. The air around me seemed to grow thicker, heavier, as though the world itself was pressing in. Then, without warning, he stepped forward. I took a step back, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had to move. I had to get away. But my body refused to cooperate. It was like my feet were glued to the pavement. The man took another step forward, his pace slow and deliberate, his presence looming larger with each movement. He wasn't running, wasn't in a hurry. He didn't need to be. He knew he had all the time in the world. And then he spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it cut through the still night air like a knife. "You shouldn't be here." The words hung in the air, heavy and chilling. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. And then something happened. A movement in the shadows, a figure creeping up behind him. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel it, just on the edge of my vision. Another figure, this one taller, thinner. Its movements were jerky, unnatural. I gasped, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. No one was around to help. The street was empty. The night was empty, except for the two figures closing in on me. Before I could react, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a tight, suffocating pressure, as though something was pressing against my ribs. I gasped for air, but it was like the very air around me had been sucked away. I collapsed to my knees, my vision blurring, my body unable to hold itself up any longer. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was the two figures moving closer, their faces hidden in the shadows. And then there was nothing. I awoke with a start, gasping for air, my body trembling. For a moment I wasn't sure where I was. The street, the figures, the dark presence. It all felt like a nightmare. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized something even worse. I was no longer on the street. The air smelled stale and musty, and the faint hum of traffic seemed distant, almost unreachable. I was lying on a cold concrete floor, the ground hard beneath me. The oppressive silence of the night had vanished, replaced by an unsettling stillness that settled into the pit of my stomach. I tried to sit up, but my body felt heavy, unresponsive, as if something was weighing me down. The pain in my chest was gone, but a deep sense of disorientation remained. My mind scrambled to make sense of what had happened. Had I passed out? Had I been attacked? The last thing I remembered was the figure's voice, his chilling words. "You shouldn't be here." But where was I now? And why couldn't I move? My head throbbed, and I reached up to touch it, only to find my hands covered in cold, sticky sweat. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet. I was in some sort of dimly lit room, its walls bare and uninviting. The air felt damp and cool, with only a single bulb hanging from the ceiling casting eerie shadows. My breath hitched in my chest as I scanned my surroundings, trying to find something familiar, anything that could explain where I was. And then I saw it. At the far end of the room, yes, standing just within the shadow of the corner, was the same man I had seen earlier, the one with the dark hoodie and eyes hidden in the darkness. He was standing perfectly still, his hands in his pockets. His presence felt suffocating, like the walls of the room were closing in around me. I took a tentative step toward him, my legs shaky, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know if I could trust my instincts anymore. I didn't know if I could trust anything in this nightmare. The man didn't move, didn't acknowledge me at all. He just stood there, silent and still. And then I heard again the low guttural growl. This time it wasn't coming from the man, but from somewhere deeper in the room, behind me. I spun around, my pulse racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. There, emerging from the shadows, was another figure. Tall, thin, its body jerking unnaturally with every movement. Its face was shrouded in darkness, just like the others, and I could feel its presence bearing down on me, suffocating me from every angle. My legs refused to move. I couldn't run, couldn't scream. The silence around me grew deafening, except for the growl, which now seemed to be coming from every direction. I turned to face the man again, but he was gone, vanished, and in his place stood a figure much taller than I could have imagined, its form shifting and flickering, like a shadow that couldn't quite stay in one place. The growl grew louder and closer. I backed away, but there was no way out, no doors, no windows, no escape. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, I heard the man's voice again. This time, it was coming from everywhere. "You're not leaving." The walls around me seemed to close in, the space shrinking tighter and tighter with every second. I was trapped, surrounded by shadows and figures, with nowhere to run. I closed my eyes, praying this was some twisted nightmare I would wake up from. But when I opened them again, the room was gone. I was no longer on the cold concrete floor. I was somewhere else, somewhere worse. I woke up with a start, gasping for air, my heart pounding as though it had never stopped racing. The darkness of the room was familiar, and yet everything felt wrong. The stillness around me felt oppressive, almost suffocating. For a moment I was unsure whether I was still in the nightmare or if I had truly woken up. My body ached, the sweat clinging to my skin as I lay there, struggling to piece together the fragmented images of what had happened, of the shadowy figures, the growl that echoed in my ears, the crushing feeling of being trapped in that dark, empty room. I slowly sat up in bed, my breathing ragged as I glanced around the room. It was my room. The familiar walls, the nightstand with my phone and lamp, the dresser with clothes I hadn't worn in weeks. It was all there, but something wasn't right. The stillness in the air felt heavier than before, as though the silence was waiting for something. My mind raced, replaying every detail of what had happened. The dark figure in the hoodie, its presence suffocating me in the night. The growl, so deep and guttural, vibrating through my bones. The man's voice whispering, "You're not leaving." Had I been hallucinating? Was it some twisted dream induced by exhaustion and fear? Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, making me see things that weren't there. I glanced at the clock beside my bed, 2:43 a.m. I had been asleep for hours, but it didn't feel like that much time had passed. In fact, it felt like only moments ago that I had been running, trying to escape the creature that had been following me. I couldn't remember when or how I had gotten back home, or how long I had been lying in this bed. All I knew was that I felt unsettled, like something was lingering just beneath the surface, waiting to resurface. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I jumped, startled by the sudden noise. I grabbed it, hoping for some kind of reassurance, maybe a text, an email, anything to tell me that I was overreacting, that the terror I had just lived through was nothing more than a nightmare. But when I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. There was a new message from an unknown number, the text short and simple. "You're not free. You'll never escape." I stared at the message for a long moment, my mind refusing to process it. My pulse quickened again, and I felt the weight of the air pressing down on me. My phone slipped from my hand and fell onto the bed, and for a second, I was frozen. The room seemed to shrink around me, the walls drawing closer. The silence was no longer comforting. It felt heavy, as if something unseen was waiting, lurking just out of sight. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The growing sense of dread gnawed at me, like something was watching me from the shadows of my own home. I had barely moved when I heard it again, the low growl, distant but unmistakable, reverberating through the walls of the room. My heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be real, could it? I had to be imagining it. This wasn't happening. I rushed to the window and peeked through the blinds, but all I could see was the dark street, the dim streetlights casting their flickering glow onto the quiet pavement. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed safe, except for the unease creeping over me. The growl came again, louder this time, and it was closer. I felt my body freeze, my breath caught in my throat. The sound seemed to come from the street, from the shadows just outside my window. I wanted to scream, to shout out, but my voice was trapped inside me. My legs were like lead, and I couldn't bring myself to move. And then in the reflection of the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow, tall, dark, and looming, moved across the yard. It was a figure, but it wasn't human. It was too tall, too thin, its body stretching and shifting unnaturally in the dim light. I couldn't see its face, but I didn't need to. I knew what I was seeing. I backed away from the window, stumbling as I fell backward onto the bed. The figure was out there, standing in the yard, watching me. I could feel its eyes, even though I couldn't see them. They were burning through the glass, locking onto me. The growl came again, louder now, coming from just beyond the yard. I grabbed my phone, desperately scrolling through my contacts, trying to find someone, anyone, who could make sense of this. I tried calling a friend, but the phone line was dead. The message from the unknown number, "You're not free, you'll never escape," echoed in my mind. Suddenly, the door to my room creaked open. I froze. There was no sound of footsteps, no warning, but the door slowly inched open, as if someone or something was gently pushing it. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My heart pounded so loudly in my chest that I thought it might burst. I watched the door, my eyes wide in terror, as it opened all the way. The shadows in the hallway seemed to stretch toward me, dark and menacing. I could hear the faintest whisper from beyond the door, a voice so low I could barely make it out. But it was unmistakable. "You shouldn't have come back." I wasn't alone anymore. It was here. The thing I had tried to escape was inside my house now. The door slammed shut and everything went silent. The room was dark, too dark. I couldn't breathe. The darkness seemed to close in on me, pressing on my chest. The shadows in the room were alive now, stretching and writhing, pulling me deeper into the abyss. I closed my eyes, praying that it was all a dream, that I would wake up in the safety of my own bed, free from the terror that had consumed me. But when I opened them again, I was no longer in my bed. I was back on the street, the same street I had been running down, alone with the same figure waiting at a distance. But this time, I wasn't frozen in fear. This time, I wasn't trapped. The terror in my chest began to fade, replaced by an overwhelming surge of adrenaline. I didn't know how or why, but something inside me shifted. I knew what I had to do. Without thinking, I turned and ran. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel the oppressive weight of fear pulling me back. I ran, faster than I had ever run before, through the darkness. with only the sound of my pounding footsteps and the whisper of the wind in my ears. And when I finally turned the corner, I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. I had escaped for now.